What if I need a waiver for a misrepresentation? Hi, I'm Jim Hacking, immigration lawyer practicing law throughout the United States at our offices in St. Louis, San Diego, and Washington, D.C. In today's video, we're talking about marriage-based green cards, and we're talking about situations where the foreign national is accused of having made a misrepresentation either to the State Department or to USCIS or to CBP when coming through customs, and they now have to deal with it before they get their green card. Of course, anybody applying for a marriage-based green card has to first prove that the marriage is valid. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about a situation where the I-130 has been approved. Everyone agrees that the marriage is valid, but the officer who's conducting the green card interview believes that the non-citizen, the person applying for lawful permanent resident status, has some inadmissibility problem related to a misrepresentation. Now, let me tell you first off that USCIS has gotten much more sophisticated when it comes to tracking down representations made by foreign nationals when they come to the United States, when they apply for a visa, when they come through customs. They now, you should assume, have the ability to go back and find everything related to any entry you ever tried to make, any attempt you tried to get a visa, anytime you tried to make it through customs. You have to assume that everything's recorded, everything's documented, and that they know exactly what you did. So sometimes that comes back to bite you in the butt many, many years later at your green card interview. And when that happens, the officer might invite you to submit a waiver. And the waiver is something that you need in order to overcome the grounds of inadmissibility. Now, the problem for most immigrants is that this is all within the call of the officer. The officer gets to decide whether or not you made a misrepresentation. The officer gets to decide whether you were engaged in some kind of fraud or if you tried to trick or lie your way into the United States. So the problem is you're dealing with the officer and you're trying to explain to the officer that you did not commit a misrepresentation. And I've been in some interviews in which this gets pretty heated. Let me tell you about one of those recently. So I have a client who is applying for adjustment of status. He has entered the United States many, many times, and he's had different kinds of visas. He's had B1, B2s, he's had H1Bs. And this officer that we were dealing with was convinced that he had misrepresented himself during the course of his interview, or of the visa interview. And at the USCIS interview for the green card, this came up again. And it was actually a second interview. It was a Stokes interview where the couple was separated. I was in the room with the client. The client had a very reasonable explanation as to why he had not committed a misrepresentation, but the officer simply refused to believe it. I got a little heated. I got a little upset. I was doing everything I can to protect the client. The client was doing a great job of advocating for himself and explaining how there had been no misrepresentation when he had received one of his visas from the State Department at the embassy back home. But the officer wasn't having it, and the officer dug in his heels. And at the end of the interview, the officer said, I find that you are inadmissible and that in order for you to obtain lawful permanent residence in the United States, you are going to need a waiver. He gave us a request for evidence and invited us to submit a waiver within a certain amount of time. I went outside and I talked to my client, and of course, they were very upset. It's sort of an upsetting situation when someone's accusing you to your face of misrepresentation. I do give props to the officer because so often they just do this mealy-mouthed way in the mail. They don't tell you to your face what they think you need. But this officer, he was a law and order type, and he was very direct, and we had a good conversation except for this dispute we had over whether or not there'd been a misrepresentation. So now my client has to get a waiver, and they have to go through the process of demonstrating that it would be extreme hardship for his spouse or his parents if he were to have to go back and live in his home country. And so this is going to be a big hassle. It's going to be a lot more expensive. It's a ton of more legal work. And I certainly feel badly for the client. But the issue that comes up in these situations is when you submit the waiver, do you try to relitigate the issue of whether or not the waiver is even necessary? Because, as I mentioned, the officer who accused you of needing the waiver is the officer who's going to decide whether or not you get the waiver. So you have to ask yourself when you're submitting the response, do I need to re-argue whether or not a waiver is necessary? Do I risk antagonizing or pissing off the officer if I tell him how dumb he is and how I don't really need a waiver? Or do I just simply play it straight and submit the waiver? And I've had different conversations with attorneys in the office, and we've handled this in different ways depending on the case and depending on the officer. And I think that's really what it comes down to. You have to ask yourself, having sat across from this officer in that case for 3 hours, how is this going to be received if we tell him that he's wrong just one more time? I feel like the issue had been fully discussed. My client advocated for himself. Like I said, I advocated for him. We just had a difference of agreement. So I don't think that there would be much value in going into a ton of detail about how dumb the officer is, or how wrong he is, or how there was no misrepresentation. I think you touch on it lightly, and then you turn your attention to the waiver itself. So here you have to document why it would be so hard. And it goes beyond regular hardship of somebody being deported or having to leave the United States. This has to be exceptional hardship. It has to be something really sort of extreme, sort of beyond the pale. And so you have to look at the health conditions of family members who are qualifying relatives. You have to look at psychological records. You really have to build a case that this case is unusual. It's a little bit extreme. It's beyond the typical situation, and you really have to advocate for that. But I really think if you're going through this process, you definitely should use a lawyer on this. This is not something that you can do on your own. But I hope that the video helps explain sort of the mindset of what you need to be thinking about. How do you reach that officer who you sort of battled with for 3 hours about whether or not a misrepresentation occurred? How do you then flip it on its head and say, okay, well, you say I need a waiver, and here's my waiver, and I think we win because of the waiver. But I think you've got to start at the beginning and at the end by saying, don't want to antagonize anybody, don't want to relitigate it, but we don't think we need a waiver. But that being said, here's our waiver, please approve it. And that's the approach I think you have to take. That's going to put you in the best chance of success for getting a green card if you've been accused of a misrepresentation. If you have been accused of such a misrep or fraud, and if you need our help putting together a waiver or helping you get ready for an interview where you think you might be accused of needing a waiver for misrep, give us a call at 314-961-8200. You can email us at info@hackingimmigrationlaw.com. Don't forget, we also have our Immigrant Home Facebook group. There are immigrants joining that thing every single day. I saw over the weekend we had about 40 people join. We'd love to have you. People talk about their immigration cases, processing times, and all those kinds of things in the Facebook group. It's also where you'll find us when we go live, which we do 2 or 3 or 4 times a week, where we do the Immigration Answer Show. I'm answering as many immigration law related questions as I can during the course of that hour. We'd love to have you there. And of course, that's also on our YouTube channel, which you should subscribe to whenever we make a new video like this one. You'll be the first one to know. You'll also be alerted as soon as we go live. Thanks a lot. We hope you found this valuable, and we'll see you next time.